Hi, friend. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. And in this week's episode, I'm sitting down with guest co-host Peggy Katz to talk all about what it's like to work events of different scale. Everything from your smaller, more local events to the Olympic Games. We have produced both. And so we kind of compare and contrast what that experience looks like and how you can learn both from the large scale events, but also apply some of those lessons to your small and vice versa. So we're excited to dive in. We mainly attack this from the production side, but there's something in there for everyone. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by a guest co-host, Peggy Katz. And before I introduce her, I do want to plug our amazing workshop that Mary and I filmed. It is an on-demand workshop all about how to start an event planning business. And this is, like I said, on-demand, self-paced. It's about a 5-hour workshop split up into 5 parts, and it is chock filled with all of our tips and tricks, things we wish we knew if we'd started our business, as well as templates. We have a pricing calculator in there. We have sample contracts. I have sample scopes of work I use with agencies that I work with. There's so much stuff in there. And so we highly want to encourage you, if you are thinking about starting an event planning business, already planning, but wishing you had that kind of business bestie, workshops for you. Link is in the show notes. But now I get to introduce our co-host. So Peggy Katz is going to be joining me for the next couple episodes. So listener, Peggy Katz is a veteran live event producer and stage manager with over 2 decades of experience bringing the world's biggest sporting events to life. Her Olympic resume spans 7 games from Salt Lake City in 2002 to the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics in 2026, where she's served in roles as venue producer and most recently as a producer for Athlete Moment with the Olympic Broadcasting Services. Beyond the Olympics, Peggy has also produced major corporate events across the globe. Her favorite roles include producer, showcaller, and deck manager. Peggy, is there anything else you'd like to add to that lovely bio?
I think you covered it all. Thank you so much. And everything's mentioned together. It sounds impressive.
Yes. Yeah. Peggy and I got to meet working. I think we first worked the World Games together, and then since then have gotten to do some Olympic experiences together. So I'm just thrilled to have you here on the podcast and can't wait for everything you get to share with our listeners. But let's start with our conversation starter. So Peggy, what is your go-to breakfast in your current season of life?
Oh, my go-to breakfast. I like a couple of eggs in the morning. Just eggs with a little bit of salt and a cup of coffee. That's kind of my jam. Yeah.
I love it. Are you a scrambled egg gal or is it fried eggs?
Over medium. Yep.
Over medium.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's my jam.
I feel like for me, I normally am an eggs person. I have been traveling a lot this spring, and so my fridge is a little sad. I can't keep fresh things. So my go-to has been, I probably have talked about on the podcast, is what I call protein coffee, which sounds more intriguing than it is, but it's a pre-mixed little the protein shakes you can buy in the bottles, and I pour it over ice and espresso. So it makes essentially a latte, but instead of milk, I'm using usually vanilla flavored. They also make coffee flavored protein shakes if you really want coffee with your coffee. But it's a hack I use on site, and now that's very shelf stable, and I can have those. I literally had one today because I didn't have time to go get groceries this morning. So yeah, protein coffees is a protein packed latte.
I will have to try that. Yeah. Because I'm big on the protein in the morning, and that's hence the eggs. So
yes, it has been the ones I use I like our Pure Protein is what the brand is, pre-mixed, so it's not powder. I feel like I can taste the powder if it is. So it's pre-mixed, but you can buy them like CVS, any grocery store. So when I'm on site, I usually try to run out to one, and I have one in the morning, and it just makes me feel like I did something for me with protein.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, a little bit about why we picked this topic this week. We're going to talk about just the differences that come with working different scales of events. And both Peggy and I have worked several Olympics as well as corporate events, and some of them have budgets that are in the multi-million. Olympics are probably in the hundreds of $1 million budget, but also all the way down to events that just have about a $10,000 budget or even less than that for their production. And we've also worked in different countries, which have different standards of living. And so we've really kind of seen that the difference in location can really change your event resources, not necessarily the quality of the event, but maybe what you're asked, the tools you're given to execute. So we're going to chat about it. But as always, we like to start broad on the podcast. So Peggy, I'd love to hear your definition of like when we're talking about events at different scales, what do we mean?
Well, I think budget dictates everything. I mean, it's the amount of staff you have, the amount of time you have to prepare, rehearsal schedules, everything like that. I mean, sometimes you have to stay lean, and it's nice to be able to take on several roles. But there's also a comfort in it, if you do have the budget and you can just focus on one little piece of it. I think one thing that shows up a lot with corporate events is the larger the budget, the more rehearsal time you have. You can get people on stage. You can do full tech rehearsals and client rehearsals and get everybody comfortable ahead of time. Whereas sometimes you're just kind of coming in hot. You're like, give me your deck. You're up on stage. I'm going to give you all the tools that I have. But it really, if you have the budget to walk through everything ahead of time and get people really comfortable and take that time with each presenter, I think it really does make a difference.
Definitely. And I feel like another angle of that scale can sometimes be like the reach or your audience size with an event. But to your point, though, I have worked events that are like, oh, we're trying to entertain 3,000 people, but the budget's very different. I have somebody who's got millions of dollars to spend and another that's like, we had to cut stuff, but we still want it to look like it's $1 million. So how do we bridge that gap? And so that's also different of like, if I'm doing a 3,000 person event versus a 100 person event, that can look a little different too, of like scaling what we do. But really, yeah, I think budget is like the key determining factor. I do think it's interesting from like Olympic experiences that even though the Olympics are the Olympics, there's a certain level that they're meant to be at. What we do often doesn't have the same budget. It varies based on the games and based on the country, host country, and yet you're still expected to have this very high level. So that's also an interesting like conundrum, I feel like at times where I would just as an outsider, I would assume it's the same every time or same plus increasing because of inflation, but that's just not always the case. So that's also, I think, an interesting angle for our listeners to know, because again, you would assume it's the same, but it honestly, it's varied over the years. And I'm sure for you, if you've been since 2002 to 2026, budgets have probably changed, but also like fluctuated up, down, depending on the priorities of the host country.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then with some countries, there were a couple of rehearsals I ran with a dark video board because there was no power and the generator wasn't working. So I'd say, okay, we are running rehearsals off of our laptop. We're going to get our crew nice and tight. But right now, that black video board is a big pile of money sitting out there that we're not able to use. So it is really interesting the challenges that come from money and resources throughout. Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking of games I worked in the last couple of years. We left the video board on all night.
Yeah.
So it's funny if you're talking, you're like, we don't have power. And this one, I was like, so yeah, we got to power down and I'll leave time in the morning for us to power back. They're like, no, we just leave it on.
No, just leave it on. Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. Especially that. Well, they also had a good point. Anytime it's like a cold sport, it's like, we should leave it on so it doesn't freeze, but like at a low level. But it's just what I was like, oh, I would have assumed you turn it off, you turn it back on, but
right.
Now.
Right.
Yeah. So thinking about this, we talk about budget being so big. How, Peggy, for your experience, how has budget impacted your role as the producer or show caller? You kind of mentioned rehearsals, so I don't know if you want to dive more into that aspect of it.
It's all about time, right? I mean, if you have the space for an extra day and can run full rehearsals with, you've got enough time after load in and before everything starts, and you can rehearse with each person individually, it really does make a difference. And rehearsals aren't, I'm talking more corporate events right now, but rehearsals aren't just for the presenter. It's also for the crew getting to know the presenter and how they're cueing things and teaching them how to cue us. coming up next, there's a video, or knowing like when to, if no, getting to know their deck and how long they're going to stay on each slide, and really being cued into, um, yeah, all the different elements. So I think I've been in some situations where we don't have the luxury of like a full day of rehearsals, and we're just kind of doing it piecemeal. And um, sometimes you get presenters that are very well versed with doing this, and they're completely comfortable, but that doesn't help us get to know them and how they're running things. And if you really want something to be seamless, I think rehearsals are key. And budget impacts all of that. A lot of times when budgets start shrinking, rehearsal times shrink as well.
Yeah, and that's one, I mean, there's no formula, I would say, that is like, oh, if you give us this much time for rehearsal, we're guaranteed that we'll do everything we need to do. But to your point, yes, the longer the rehearsal time you have, both that's speaker facing, but also your internal tech time, to make sure, like I always emphasize with clients of like, yeah, having that extra day or even a half day before speakers are getting there for speaker rehearsals. It's like, give us a half day to get through our rough cueing, making sure we're all aligned. We all know what's going on. So then, yes, we can focus 100% on just learning the speaker. And then we're not wasting the speaker's time while they're on stage and we're trying to figure out, our switcher hasn't figured out all of their buttons of like how to bring up this presentation versus a video. And, you know, we've already figured that out. But I am surprised. Yeah, my corporate shows, I feel like with the larger budgets, they're getting access to the venue 3 days before their first actual event day. So like I have a show on, it would be a show on Monday. We're getting in there Friday to start loading in. And that means then Saturday night, I might get some time with my tech team as the producer, show caller, to go through things. And then that frees us up Sunday to be completely open for speaker rehearsals before we actually get going on Monday. But I also have a project that is much smaller, and it's an award show, which feels very complicated still. I'm coming in at 12 o'clock on that show day, and the show's at 7, and we're just going to have to tech time and do rehearsal time, you know, all just on that same day, because that's just what they have budgeted, is just one day on site. So I feel like, to your point, the more moving parts you have, probably the more sessions on a single award show, we're going to pull it off in one day. A single gala, you can pull it off in a day.
Yeah.
If it's a multi-day conference, trying to smash everything into the morning of day one or even just the day before, you are really going to kind of not set your team up for success. I feel like you need that rehearsal time.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Yeah. And I think also another one I have is like, I think you and I were talking before we filmed, of like, the budget can also impact our roles of how much time we have on the project. So some folks that have a lot of pre-production, meaning they have a lot of time for you ahead of being on site to work with them on their program, to figure out exactly what AV they need or what AV is planned, versus a role where you're a little more day of. Like some show callers are just kind of like, I show up, here's my run of show, I call it, or they get one phone call with you and then they're on site. And those are different. I always joke, because sometimes I'm like, if I'm part of the pre-production, I can kind of help you get ahead of some stuff. And I know your show inside and out. And as a show caller that's just showing up on site, you can still learn it inside and out, but it just takes time to like absorb it. And often in those roles, challenges will come up on site and I can't change it. I can like try to make the most of it, but I can't add gear. But I could say, oh, let's shift your confidence monitor position. Let's shift it over a little bit to make it better in your line of sight. But I can't like add a confidence monitor. I had a show, we didn't have one. And it was like, okay, we're paper notes. I'll just make sure your paper notes are up on the podium when you need them. So yeah, there's all kinds of, I feel like the budget can really impact how much impact we can have on an event. And then also, yeah, the scale of rehearsal time, and then even your crew size. I mean, I don't know, like Peggy, have you done a show where you only have, I've done ones where I have like one tech person with me.
Yeah.
And then you have ones where it's like 20 people are listening to your cues.
Right. Yeah. Some shows it's like a one-man band and they're doing graphics and video, and it just everything all together. So it is nice. It is nice to have a full crew and just have like everybody's attention just on, their piece. But I think as freelancers, we're all used to scaling up and down. You work the big ones, you work the small ones.
Yeah, it kind of leads us into, I feel like, our next question of like, what are some of the benefits of working with those larger budgets?
I think a lot of it just comes I think it all just comes down to time. Like when there's a larger budget, everybody, you've everybody has the pre-production time. You can spend more time just thinking about this rather than, okay, I'm not going to look at your project till I get on the plane because that's not what you're paying me for, and you haven't reserved my time outside of that. So the ones that, to your point, you look at it when you get on the plane, and you're like, well, this is what I have to work with. Will somebody else put this together? I will execute. I might have some opinions about how I would have done this differently, but like, this is how this is running. Yeah.
Yeah, I think too with like bigger events, the bigger budgets, you also get a lot of folks who are more specialized in their roles.
Mm.
So you're getting, you know, the top audio person that like they just own audio. They're part of these big shows. They've been under the pressure. You get your deck manager that has managed big stages. Like you're getting folks that probably cost more to be able to fit in that larger budget, but they're like super specialized in what they do. Which I think is a great benefit of having the larger budget. It also, though, with larger budget comes larger implications. Like we talk about rehearsal time and scheduling. I think something I deal with as a producer is often like if a rehearsal goes long, when you have a 20-person crew, one more hour of overtime becomes like a large, like I've had to like literally be like, so if we don't cut the crew in 15 minutes, it's going to be like $8,000 more, which like that's a lot of money. And to some of my clients who have a $10,000 budget, that would blow their mind. But it's like, and sometimes I've been a part of both the scenario where they go, okay, charge, like, that's fine. We need this extra rehearsal. The speaker needs it. And then there's others where they're like, no, we'll tell the speaker to wrap up. We'll get you guys off stage so you can get out of here. In a way that if you had a smaller, it's only two of you, like the impact is, an extra $300 for making you stay an extra hour.
Yeah. And I think the communication with that is key because a lot of presenters that are up there, usually like a CEO or somebody, they don't realize it's going to cost $8,000 if they run a little bit over. So you definitely have to get in front of that and say, listen, this is what we can do. If you want, you could sit, if you're making changes to your deck, we can arrange for you to sit with graphics. But if you're going to be on stage, I've got a lot of people here watching you kind of figure this out. So,
yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think and thinking also like large, but then on the other side of this of like benefits of working big budget events, I think of our Olympic experience and our multi-sport games experience, like your Pan American Games, your World Games. I also think that's a fascinating one where it's a big event budget for the overall event, but maybe the budget allocated to like our roles and what we're doing with the team we have is scaled back, but you're also asked to still deliver a very high level. And that's just one that I think I know I like it because I like working in those higher pressure situations, but it is funny to be like, okay, got to make this work with like, or I've had it where it's like, we don't have in-venue cameras. Okay, how do we entertain fans and keep them engaged, but we can't do a dance cam or something like that. So right. I like it because it's something you have to think creatively. And I feel like for some of those events, they've learned to scale and maybe give different sports different like tiers of support from a crew and a gear perspective. And that's a way I think you can make the most of it. For any listener listening to this, if you have an event that has multi-rooms, have one room that gets the full bells and whistles, a room that's more scaled down, a room that's more bare bones, like is a way that you can easily make your budget go farther than trying to like do everything everywhere all at once. But I definitely like for what we have to do, that's like my first question. I feel like any project I get brought in, I'm like, so what do I have to play with? Like, what are my toys? Yeah. As a producer or show caller, like what can I, when I have that pre-production, like what can I use? And then I'll try to get creative and we can feel bigger than we are. But that usually you're kind of limited by what the gear is or the crew, the amount of crew you have.
Yeah, that's very true. How about the smaller budget events? Pros and cons of smaller budget events.
I have a soft spot for my smaller budget folks. I don't know, Peggy, what's like the smallest event production budget you've worked with, but I've had some folks where like they literally do have like $6,000 or $10,000. They tend to be nonprofits, and I feel like I used to kind of take them for granted. Where it's like, oh, they're small. They don't have a lot of money to invest in what I do. And then I actually have like looked back at some of my like personal revenue and things I've made. And I've like, oh, but sometimes they're also the most understanding of like, hey, let's have a very specific scope for what I'm doing. And they actually respect that. I find a lot more than some of my bigger clients who just think we got you for a bunch of pre-production. We can ask you to be on calls at any time of day, ping you all the time. And like my smaller folks kind of understand, okay, we get like 2 check-ins with Logan. She's going to read our AV quote. She'll be on site with, like, they're very clear of what they get. And I kind of enjoy having to figure it out a little bit. Like I joke, I become a graphics operator if I have to for a client that can't afford a graphics person. I know my own limitations. Like I have one client that they paid for the equipment to be dropped off and set up. And then I was supposed to operate all the audio, video, and graphics.
Ooh.
Yeah. And it was one, again, client, super small budget. They were just, before in the past, they'd done it with a volunteer. They were excited to have somebody like myself getting paid to be there. I was like, did not pretend at all to them. I was like, I am not an operator. I know basics about audio. I know PowerPoint pretty well, but I was like, and videos, I'm going to embed them in the PowerPoint to make my life easier. Like, and I know how to show call it, but I'm not the operator. And that was probably the most stressful project being on site, because I had to think of everything.
Yeah.
We also had a camera that I could switch to. So I was also the switcher, and it was just too many things.
Yeah.
And I did get to the point that I was like, with the audio, all I can really do is like turn things on and off and like up and down. I don't know enough to like help with gain or anything like that. And so my limitations with small projects is like, I'll be your graphics op if you need me to be, but I need one other tech operator, and they need to be an audio person, because I can't fix a ringing mic. I can't. So I like it because it's something different.
Interesting things. Like I definitely get what you're saying. Like, you say with your smaller budget clients, they know they only have a certain number of check-ins with you. But I think that's definitely a learned skill, where like you have to be very clear, because I'm not always the best at that, and there tends to be a lot of scope creep. And as long as I'm clear up front and say, these are the number of check-ins, this is what I'll provide, and that's where we're at. The other thing about smaller budgets is I've worked a couple of sporting events where they usually have a good crew of volunteers, and a lot of times there'll be university students or somebody coming in and training. And when you say like, I'm audio and graphics and video, the couple of times where I have had a university student, it's been wonderful to be able to say, this is your job. Let me show you these basic graphics packages. And when I call for it, this is what you do, and explaining this across the board. And even, it's the same with audio, video playback. A lot of times you'll have some people standing in who are so eager to do a good job and help. And it's really nice to have them kind of pulled in. So I do appreciate that with some of the smaller events, and the coordination and kind of like getting the community involved. Like I worked the university games in Germany a summer or two ago, and they had a really great program for not only the athletes, but this really robust volunteer program, and really great, smart students ready to learn. So I like when they have those sync ups.
Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned that. That like jogged for me. I completely forgot. Even some of our larger scale events, a way they can make budgets go farther is having volunteers.
Yeah.
Because it's one, as you mentioned, community involvement. It's an educational perspective sometimes if they specifically are getting students to help, but also it is a way to make budget go farther, right? Because you can then have extra, a lot of times, some of the things we do, you just need extra hands.
Yeah.
And like an extra body. Like I'm thinking with our sports presentation, you have your MC and they usually need a camera with them. Well, they probably need ideally a floor or field producer, but sometimes they can't afford one. So that can be a volunteer who can help like hold their stuff, be on headset to hear if you have something you need to say to them. And so that's another thing I think is really interesting. I think with the games, we get a lot more passionate volunteers. I don't know if I see that at non-sporting events. I know like some of my nonprofits have some volunteers they get, and that's a problem that they have of like making sure you're passionate and know what you're doing. Corporate, I've definitely struggled when it's like employees who are volunteers for things and they've been voluntold to do something. But that is something I would think another tidbit for listeners. If you are doing an event and running out of resources to pay people, volunteers is an option, even if it doesn't feel like it's a natural fit. I think sporting events, that's always a cool thing to do, but even reaching out to universities, to your point, Peggy, of like having smart, capable folks who just aren't getting opportunities because they're students and they're usually willing to learn, that could actually add to your event team and help you make more of an impact without having to pay folks.
Yeah. And I will say volunteers are not free. Like if you want them to work hard, you really have to treat them well. I mean,
Yeah.
with a lot of sporting events, they get like a good uniform, they get a ton of perks around it. And it's fun to be backstage or in the control room or, leading a mascot out into the crowd. It's perks like that. So you definitely have to put them in good positions and they'll work hard for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, gear, meals, that's when I feel like you got to feed your volunteers at any of these scales of events. But yeah. And then the student angle, I haven't been a part of setting that up, but I know there's some universities that are looking for, whether it's like work study, like credit for what they do if you're part of a longer term event.
Yeah.
But that is definitely, our like Olympics multi-sport that are like multi-weeks. It is nice when you can get volunteers, any volunteer, and usually having a couple so they can rotate in and out because again, they're volunteers. They probably got school or another job or something like that.
Yeah.
But
we had some really good volunteers in Milan. I had 3 of them kind of rotating in and out, and they did a fantastic job and they were thrilled to be there. And we definitely made it worth their while and indispensable. I mean, I couldn't have done it without any of them.
Yeah. Well, shout out to all of our lovely volunteers. Peggy, I'd love your answer to this next question of thinking through like working sports presentation and broadcast at the Olympic level. We've talked a little bit about the country, but like how have you noticed the scale of the event or even just your role and the production differing based on the country that you're in?
I mean, with most of them, it's the same amount of people that are there. But like in the States, you'll have bigger video boards because you're in an existing stadium and there's a larger, we're just set up like that a little bit. A lot of times when you go to South America and work, you'll be in a massive stadium, but the video board's a lot smaller. And you're like, wow, I guess I just get so used to in the States, you walk into a bar and there's 6 big screens with sporting events on them and you don't even blink, whereas that's not typical in other countries. So there's different things that in different countries that they do instead. I mean, you go to a soccer game in Brazil and you see that, there's flags and fireworks, and I'm talking the massive flags that cover the stands and trail down from the very top, and you see it tumble down to the bottom, and everyone knows like when to lift it, when to sing. And I think those are it's such a great tight community, and not everyone's not looking at the video board. I like the differences.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's taught me just how much of like a chameleon you kind of have to be as the producer or show caller to do that and hop to different countries because, like you said, like US, it is one that like with entertainment at sports, we are like, there's a high level, but it's not across all sports, but like NBA's been around for a really long time. So they've got the giant screens, they've got the cryo, they've got the special effects, the music, the DJs, they got all of that. And then you have your new emerging sports that are still they want to put on that big of a show, don't have the budget for it just yet. They're growing. So they're trying to figure out how to do it. And I feel like when you go abroad, if you are trying to find success, sports presentation specifically, but really any event, if you're just going to come in as like a bull in a china shop American of like, this is how it is, it's got to be this way, it has to be, we need a big screen, we need to do all this stuff. And I've just learned like that doesn't always work. Yeah. And so sometimes it's budget based where it's like, we just can't afford a bigger screen. It's like, great. Or like I've worked sports where it's like, we have one screen. So pregame, you get to do all your fun stuff. But like once the game starts or the sport starts, it has to be a competition screen. It's got to show scores. It's got to show whatever else is happening. And that's like, okay, that's a compromise. We get there. That's fine. And you have to just be, I mean, I always say it's all about the F word. It's all about being flexible. Just like we got to roll with it. And so I feel like that's something that I've noticed depending on the country is often I'm like, here's my goals in a dream world. This is what I would love us to do. If that's not feasible based on the tools I have or what we can do here.
Right.
And that's what it is. But you still want to have it like, we're still going to make it polished. Even if I don't, I also had an event, I didn't have a video board. And I did joke I was going to send, we had some rally squad people. I was going to send them into the outfield with like posters and be like, they would flip it. So it's the logo loop. They would flip it. Like, I just was like joking. I was like, I'm not actually going to do it, but I was like, we could do something. But it was like, all right, how can we be more interesting in our announcements or like engaging, or do we just put people like I would have my MC like physically in front of the fans being like, go stand wherever the space that everyone can make can see you and make big hand gestures to be like, I'm down here right in front of you so you can see me for what I'm doing, you know. So I think it's just interesting. I feel like there's stuff to learn, but just having to be a chameleon of both with your resources, but also even like culturally, to your point, like Brazil football. How much do you really need to do to make that stadium jump? Probably not that much, because they're going to do that.
Yeah. Fans have been trained. They have been doing that their whole lives. They have taken over and they do it on their own. So you just kind of give them a couple prompts and yeah.
Well, and even to like broadcast, I think it's interesting of like, depending on the sport and the audience size of like who's watching around the world, depends on the number of cameras you have and maybe how intense your director is of wanting to have lots of rehearsals to get the cameras exactly right versus a sport that maybe is, again, a more of an emerging market where it's like, we've got our couple shots. I don't need to be at your rehearsal because we know what we're doing, you know, and it's a little more laid back. So I think it is just interesting that it's not cut and paste and exactly the same thing every time, even at these large sporting events.
Yeah.
So being flexible is really the main one. And I feel like that's helped make me a better producer, show caller in my corporate world of like, I've had to deal with this in other languages, other cultures. We didn't have this, we didn't have that. So like when I hear about something in a ballroom, we need to swap a screen. It's like, yeah, no, we can do that. You have it right over there. We're not pushing it up a mountain or like trying to tap dance our way to distract you from a blinking screen. Like, you know, it just feels easier.
Absolutely.
Well, I feel like we could keep talking for hours, Peggy, but is there anything else you want to add on this topic of working with different events of different scales?
I think when we talk different scale, it's really interesting to see like when you compare any Pan American Games to any Olympic Games, it's interesting to work both of them because they're both multi-sport international games. It's just the budgets are wildly different, and I love being a part of both of them.
I think it's fun to flex those different muscles. So hopefully listeners, you get an opportunity to you can volunteer or be a part of some of the larger scale ones, because I think there's something you can always learn. And I also think doing the smaller budget ones just keeps you scrappy and on your toes to be able to apply it to your bigger budget events. So Peggy, you're going to be with us for a couple more episodes, but where can listeners find you if they want to learn more about you or get in contact?
I think LinkedIn is probably the best way. Peggy Katz on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm available and out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that link will be in the show notes for you listeners. And that brings us to the end of our episode. And Peggy, you have our bonus tip this week.
It's very small, but I mean, I think when you show up on site, you always have to be self-sufficient. And I think one of the things I do is I always have a small stapler, a Sharpie, and a clipboard with storage. All three of those things, they just make me feel better. A lot of times calling a show, you're either doing show flow or you're printing run of shows for everybody. And I swear that stapler, there might be one on site, but it's out of staples, it's whatever, and you've got papers all over the place. So I always staple them together for everybody. I write everyone's name on the top, so when I find one laying on the ground, I know whose it is. That's fine if they don't need it, but I need to know who has them and who's, because even if you are running it electronically, a lot of people do like a hard copy and they make notes to themselves. I know I do. So Sharpie and a stapler of my own. Not
Love
the
it. Oh, Peggy, I'm glad I'm not the only one who writes people's names on the top. I like to do that for crew.
Oh.
To the point, yeah, you know then who didn't pick one up. And then it's like, well, now you don't need a printed one for another day if you're not going to use it. You don't have to waste the paper. Well, thank you for that. That brings us to the end of the episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can connect with us directly on LinkedIn as well. Just let us know you heard about us from the podcast in that little like connection note. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want more Better Events content, join our private community over on Substack. And as always, we thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.